Hi, I'm Rachel. This is Missy beside me asking for attention, so we'll see how this goes. I guess she'll leave. And anyway, this is my AM reading video for Friday, March 12th, 2021. I have a few books to talk about, but mostly because I was nearing the end with two of them at the end of last week. Starting with A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir, which I listened to on audio on Libby. This is the final book in her YA fantasy quartet, the Ember and the Ashes quartet, and I described a lot of it last week, well, in terms of what you can describe about a book for without spoiling too much. It's an epic fantasy world based off of ancient Rome a little bit, off of Middle Eastern mythologies a little bit. We're in the final chapter, so the magical world building is really on high, and the characters are dealing with much bigger questions and challenges than they started out with in the first book about a young slave girl going to a military academy trying to free her brother from a prison. But anyway, the strange thing is, when I was talking about the book last week, I talked about, not being invested in the characters in the moment, and yet as I continued to talk through my thoughts about this final book, I realized that there was a lot more going on than I thought was going on in this book alone, let alone, the quartet, but even this book, this offering on its own had a lot going on. I think because I have so much feeling and so much hype about this book, I think I was overthinking things because I have so much already invested in the characters that some of my thoughts, a lot of my thoughts were based in, what had already been built up in the past three books, but yet as I talked things through, I realized, yeah, she is actually living up to it, she's continuing the story, you don't have to overthink things so much because there's, a robust story and compelling character beats that are still going on. And that's what I thought she did with the ending too. I think she stuck the landing, which is no small feat because this is a very grim world. Even from book one, she gave her characters a lot of challenges. She didn't go easy on them at all. Maybe some readers will disagree with me with regards to the final book because it's not nihilistic, and with several respects, characters get what they want, or things work out for them in a more optimistic way than nihilism. But to my mind, I think she didn't cut any corners or give any, easy reveals or easy turnarounds or anything like that. I feel like everything that happened to the characters stayed consistent with the journeys that they had gone on and what was expected from them from their magical plots. And I found it very moving, and I did tear up a little bit because I really have fallen for these characters. I think Tahir did a great job with the characters who are navigating a complicated world in a lot of ways. Like my favorite character, Helene, was a high-up military figure in a questionable empire that has done a lot of bad things, and she, of course, grew up drinking the Kool-Aid and had to go on a journey of questioning her upbringing and the larger world she belongs to. And Laia, the slave girl, is more of the traditional underdog who kind of learns her own strength. But again, it wasn't one-dimensional. It wasn't just about making her a badass and, everything she believed and fought for was 100%, righteous. She had a lot of soul-searching to do and questioning of violence. Throughout this whole thing, there's a lot of violence, but the characters respond to it often with a lot of horror, which, it reminds me of Game of Thrones, which I think felt more violent than it was because people took it seriously. It wasn't just hoorah, it was like, this has a horrible cost to it no matter what side you're on. And I feel like within the YA world, the Ember and the Ashes quartet has consistently been like that. And it, raises a lot of questions about loss and revenge, and we have it in the human characters, and then we have it in a more mythological way with the djinn, and that's the beautiful thing about fantasy, is you can explore things in a maximist way as well. I guess that's why I love epic fantasy myself. So really it was beautiful and lush and touching and pretty much a lot of the things that I look for in epic fantasy. And I know that romance, particularly with YA protagonists and all of their strong feelings and hormones, aren't for everyone, but I was cool with it. Especially in conjunction with everything else. That's certainly not the only thing that was going on here. All of the characters had their romantic lives and their friendships, and then, you know, their personal journeys of finding themselves. You know, there's also, you know, prophecies, which I love as well. But again, you know, it's complicated. You know, she took us through a journey to make their prophetic futures come true, and they really earned those futures throughout the 4 books and throughout this book as well. So, yeah, I guess that's all I can say without spoiling much, except to say I recommend this entire quartet, and I'm looking forward to what Tahir does next. The next book I finished might take me back down to earth a little bit. It is The Nest by Cynthia Sweeney. This is a Jerry Springer-esque sort of book, I guess is how it often was described. It is about a upper middle class set of siblings who are about to receive a trust with a significant amount of money coming toward them thanks to their father putting some money away for them. And they've all been living outside their means, or at least most of them have, so they're relying on, you know, that influx of money, which of course is taken away from them in the first chapter of the book when their oldest sibling, you know, is high and drunk and goes on a bender with a waitress, and, you know, it involves a car crash that has very significant outcomes to that, and their mother breaks the trust to pay people off, and now the siblings have to make do with a lot less money. So it was fun. It's a fun book. You know, I think the characters are compelling and thoughtful in their own ways, you know, based on who they are within their society and the choices they make and how they define themselves. I guess, I mean, what I'm saying here is I don't think this is a big book about what it means to be human, but I do think that it was fun and compelling. I also continue to think, like I said last week, that it was too bloated. There were too many storylines going on, and I wish we could connect more to a couple of the storylines rather than getting lost in the weeds with too many. So the ending, which I hadn't read last week, was more or less what I expected, with a couple of events, you know, reaching the climax as they're supposed to in a novel. So, you know, the siblings are kind of waiting for their older brother to bail them out, but spoiler alert, he's not that type of person, really. So the climax forces them really to finally contend with that and make plans to salvage their own lives on their own. I think some reviewers thought this was a little pat, and that she's sort of making a moralizing story about, you know, the meaning of life in this way. I think some of the storylines worked better than others. I wish the final chapter hadn't done that weird thing that some books do where it jumps way into the future to tell what the siblings are kind of like in old age, or I don't know. I really don't think it needed that, but I still think overall I had a lot of fun reading it. I enjoyed the characters, or most of them anyway. So all in all, you know, it's not an exceptional experience of reading, but it was a good one. And now, as of this weekend of filming this, I am most of the way through this book. This is Home Everywhere by McNamer. I chose this book in my last video. I did my page 112 tag, wherein I take 3 books off of my unread shelves, read page 112 from each, and then decide which one will join my TBR for the month. And this is an interesting one to talk about in that regard, because this page 112 ended up not having a lot to do with the rest of the book. This is a experimental sort of novel, and I bought it from, actually, intrigued by the back copy. I bought it from a small press, so I'll link to them down below. It's Black Lawrence Press. And this is a novel that is rather stream of consciousness for the most part. It follows a variety of characters who together are going on a tour of an unnamed Asian country. And we're very much in their heads slightly as they go on the tour, and even just going into their backstories and that sort of thing. And I have mixed thoughts. I'm liking it, I'm enjoying it. I think the writing is strong. One thing I like a lot about this sort of stream of consciousness experimental fiction is that it takes away a conceit that most fiction has to have, in that we bundle events together in too convenient of a fashion in order to make it into a narrative. And this happens with memoir too, when you're bundling events from your life together too conveniently in a way that they probably weren't lived moment to moment. But this one isn't exposition heavy because we're largely just focusing on people's flitting thoughts about their lives and their experiences, and not having to put extra weight on the scenes with too much, exposition or what have you. That being said, the downside to that is that it can be difficult to connect with the characters when the scenes don't carry extra significance a lot of the time. There is really a main character in this overall, one of the passengers, Irene, and there's enough, ultimately enough scenes of her and her backstory that we get to kind of understand her. She's not the character from page 112. That character had like one chapter and page 112 happened to be in it. So anyway, another thing I think that's difficult about this book is the idea of it. I think the writer is trying to explain the idea of tourism and how people experience travel. But I don't think this will be everyone's cup of tea, and in fact I am kind of critical of it myself because, first of all, we're talking about this unnamed Asian country. And there's very little in this book that's actually about that country and those experiences because everyone's much more self-absorbed in their own heads. And to a certain extent, I'm critical just because I feel like certainly someone on this trip actually would care about the actual place that they're going to and aren't just on the trip for a self-absorbed desire to feel part of something and then probably fail because they're really only inside their own heads and their own backstories. I mean, here's the idea that everyone wants to feel home everywhere, but really the only place I think these characters are truly at home are in their own heads. And I'm a person who agrees that, we live most of our lives in our own heads, and occasionally some of us get an altruistic urge to do something a little more. But for the most part, a lot of what we do is informed by our own internal narrative. But I feel like it's a little too much with this, and I feel like it certainly will brush against cultural critiques within the broader world, especially when it has to do with this very predominantly white, or at least everyone seems very white and American, set of people going to an unnamed Asian country with very little understanding of that country or its customs, and very little curiosity overall, it seems like, beyond talking a little bit about some Buddha statues or some monks every now and then, or random weird food. I mean, but not a whole cohesive picture of being humble and saying, I don't know much about this place, I want to learn. Instead, it feels like this Asian country, and they're on this ridiculous tour called Pleasure Paradise or something that's completely unrelated to anything having to do with Asia, which, as we all know, by the way, is a very wide swath of diverse cultures. But anyway, I feel like I'm losing my point here, but what I mean to say is that the unnamed Asian country is just like a sliver of a subplot within their lives, rather than them being humble and learning about this place and realizing, their own smallness within the world, which, it's a yin and yang thing. We're all, the center of our own lives, and we all have our own baggage with family and friends and that sort of thing. And a lot of that stuff is compelling in here. And I also think that McNamer wrote flawed characters without, making excuses for their flaws. I mean, she's just showing them how they are and that sort of thing. But yeah, this is an interesting exercise. I don't necessarily think it's 100% successful, and it's not certainly accessible. I mean, I remember, in college, loving the idea. I think I was starting to read Virginia Woolf and loving the idea of the stream of consciousness. And I can still see some benefits to that idea of, some scenes that feel more real and not getting too caught up in heavy exposition or that sort of thing. And yet, I think I'm also aware of the strengths of more traditional storytelling in being able to more centrally grapple with the character and the narrative on the page, I guess. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Not sure if I'll have anything to add next week when I finish it, but I'll probably ramble something else, or maybe the same thing again. Okay, and next on the docket I have this book, The Man Who Ate Too Much, The Life of James Beard by John Birdsall. This is the biography of a chef and yesteryear celebrity, I believe, but I will not be going into any more description about this because I am reading it for the BookTube prize. We are in the final few weeks of the octafinals for 2021, and I am reading for Nonfiction Group F. And I will link to more information about the BookTube prize down below. So that about covers it for me now. We have reached another weekend in the world, and I have some unusual plans, some exciting plans, I think, for Saturday, in that I am attending a Zoom meeting for my Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Writers Association, which is something I wanted to be on the ball about all this year of coronavirus and rarely was. Like back over a year ago, I'd go in person to some of their events, but never seemed to be able to get to the Zoom stuff. But this topic is very compelling to me. This is actually the MWA president will be talking to us about, this is the title, Purple Grass and Green Cows, How to Create Believable Worlds in Science Fiction and Fantasy, which can be very useful to me because I'm writing a fantasy project right now, attempting to. And in fact, I think she made this presentation in person to one of the other chapters, over a year ago, but I couldn't get to it, unfortunately. So I'm so excited to have the chance to see it virtually now, tomorrow, and hopefully get to some writing afterwards. And speaking of which, you can see me next on this channel sometime next week. I will be answering my author's answer question for March, as you do. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and week of reading and other activities ahead of you. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.